Welcome back, folks. Today we're going to continue to talk about Isaiah chapter 9, and I hope you watched the last video where I showed you how the translators of the Christian Bible changed the tense of the verbs in Isaiah to make it look like it's talking about something in the future, when in fact it's talking about something that happened in the past. Now, one of the stupidest things that I came across in preparation for this video was a Christian website that put forth the idea that it must have been very frustrating for the prophets to not understand their own prophecies. How stupid. So when they say things like that, it creates the illusion that, oh, you can't possibly understand the Bible if the prophets themselves didn't understand it, and that's why you need some clown, some Christian in Missouri or Texas to explain it to you, right? Now, before you even read the first chapters of Isaiah, it would have to be assumed that you've read the books that preceded it and you know what the story's about. And you understand that by this time, after the death of King Solomon, the nation has split into two. We have a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom retains the name Israel, and its capital is Samaria. The southern kingdom is Judah, and its capital is Jerusalem. So if you've read and understand the books that lead up to Isaiah, you should know what's going on in the story. The story in Isaiah, here's something very important that you need to know about Isaiah if you're going to understand it at all, is where it sits historically in the Bible timeline. When you read the books that precede it, it kind of reads like history. In other words, so-and-so was born, he became king, and then they went to battle, and then this happened, and then this happened. It's kind of historical. When you get to Isaiah, it's completely different. Isaiah starts off with God chastising the Israelites in chapter 1, but then offering hope and giving us some of the deepest, richest, juiciest messianic prophecy right there in chapter 2 about how there will be no more wars and they will turn their plowshares into pruning hooks. Okay, so there's prophecy going on there. And then you get up to chapter 7, and that's the first time you see, and in the year of this and that, so-and-so became king. And it's talking about King Ahaz in chapter 7. That famous chapter that Christians like to believe contains their virgin birth prophecy. We've already been introduced to King Ahaz. In chapter 16, 17, in the second book of Kings. When you read 2 Kings chapter 16, it says that they could not besiege Ahaz. And we find out why when we get to Isaiah chapter 7, because it expands on that. Okay, and that's when God says this will not happen. Here's a sign, and by the time this happens, these kingdoms will no longer be a threat. They will be destroyed. Okay, so we read about that in 16 of 2 Kings, and then it expands on it in chapter 7. Now, there's only like 5 or 6 chapters in all of Isaiah that read historically. And those are chapter 7, a little bit of 8. And then when you get to 36, it picks up again and tells us about Ahaz's son, Hezekiah, the greatest king that ever lived. And it says that in chapter 18, verse 5. So my question is, why would the prophet Isaiah focus just on these 2 kings for the historical content? And I'm guessing, this is just my opinion, okay? But I want you to think about this. When you're reading 2 Kings and it goes through king after king, it usually starts off with, and this guy did evil in the Lord, and this guy did evil in the eyes of the Lord, right? But every now and then, especially in the southern kingdom, there were no good kings in the north. They all were pretty terrible. But every now and then you'd have a somewhat decent king, and it will say, and he did good in the sight of the Lord, but he didn't do this or that, like get rid of the Asherah poles and stuff like that. When we get to Hezekiah, he took care of all that stuff. He got rid of all the idolatry. He brought back the Passover. He was a great king. He was awesome. But he comes from wicked stock. His father, Ahaz, was one of the most wicked, terrible, rottenest kings in the Bible. So I think there's that juxtaposition there. And that has something to do with it. Anyway, So the only historical chapters in Isaiah concern the wicked king Ahaz and his wonderful, greatest king of all, Hezekiah. Something else I want to point out is that during the time of Isaiah's prophetic career, in the northern kingdom, they also had a prophet, and you'll find that in the minor prophet section, Hosea. Okay, so while Isaiah is preaching to the southern kingdom, to King Ahaz, Hosea is up in the northern kingdom preaching. And you're going to find a really cool parallel when you read the first two chapters of Hosea and the first two chapters of Isaiah. Okay? And what you're going to notice is that both the first chapters are a seething indictment against the people of Israel. And then in the second chapter, again, it offers hope. What else is really cool is the names that God tells the prophet to name his children. In the southern kingdom, it's good things like Emmanuel, God is with us, or Sheher, Shabaz, Habaz, however you pronounce it. Hasten the loot, quicken the booty. Okay, so it offers hope there, and they're good names. When you talk about Hosea and his kids, first of all, God tells Hosea, hey, you're going to marry a whore. Okay, you're going to marry a prostitute. That's how bad you guys are. And his names, the names of his kids are terrible things like, you are not my people, and I will not have compassion on you. Okay, so nobody probably ever pointed that out to you. Look at those. Hold those chapters up together. First two chapters of Isaiah, and hold them up and look at them to Hosea. And because they were happening at the same time in the northern kingdom and southern kingdom. So I just thought that was really cool to throw in there. So what's important, I think, the reason that Isaiah focuses on these two kings is not only that juxtaposition, but what happened during Hezekiah's time is the second greatest miracle in the Bible. There were other great miracles, but I think this one pretty much is a close second to God bringing them out of Egypt. Exiled by Assyria. Okay, and that's soon going to happen to the southern kingdom too, because they're not much better than the northern kingdom. Remember we talked about this in the last video, Isaiah chapter 5, where he gives the prophecy that they won't understand, so they'll continue to do bad things, and they will get exiled. I know it seems like a weird concept, but that's what happens in Isaiah chapter 5 there. And then we're introduced to the prophet Isaiah. Now, Isaiah chapter 9 is looking back on this great and wonderful miracle that I'm about to tell you about. So the northern kingdom's taken away, and the southern kingdom is being attacked by the Assyrians, and they're gathered around the walls of Jerusalem, and they're saying, hey, come on out. Don't listen to Hezekiah. Your God can't go up against us. Nobody's ever won against the Assyrian Empire. And then they go to bed one night, and they wake up, and it's quiet, and they look out, and there's 185,000 dead Assyrian soldiers, and they didn't have to lift a finger. And God was zealous about Hezekiah's reign, and that's why he took care of them. It's a great miracle, isn't it? And it even says in Isaiah chapter 4 or 5 that this has not been seen since the days of Midian. What happened in Midian? Almost the same thing. If you go back to the book of Judges and read about Gideon in chapter 6, I believe it is, they're going up against the Midianites, and they have a large army. But God says, I don't want you to have a large army, because if you win, then you might think it had something to do with you and not me. So he says, anybody that doesn't want to fight or is afraid, tell them to go home. So they whittle the army down to about 10,000, up against an army of more than 10 times that with the Midianites. And God says, it's still too big of an army. So they go down to the river, and he says, anybody that takes a drink by scooping water up with their hands into their mouth will be in the army. And most of them just kind of lean down and drink water with their lips, so they're out. So they whittle it down to 300. 300 soldiers against 120,000 Assyrians. Or no, not Assyrians, but Midianites. And they win. So that's what that's referring to in Isaiah 9, verse 4 there. The day of Midianites. Why? Because Hezekiah was right with the eyes of the Lord. Okay, he has been born. He has been given to us. And the government rests on his shoulders. Jesus was never part of a government. He was never a king or nothing. He never went in a battle. He got killed by a foreign nation. by the Romans. So he was never a king. He never won any battles or anything like that. All right. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. What does Hezekiah's name mean? His name means strengthened by the Lord, the strength of God. So these names, although they could be attributes of a Messiah, they're the attributes of Hezekiah. And what I want to leave you with is this. There's a term in chapter 9 that says the zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. It appears right there in chapter 9, verse 7, or 6 if you're reading the Hebrew Scriptures. Can you guess where this phrase appears 2 more times in the entire Tanak? In 2 Kings 19, right there, when Hezekiah prays to God to deliver Jerusalem from the Assyrians. And it also appears again when this story is reiterated in Isaiah chapter 37, verse 32.